if you're lucky enough to have success in the industry, you become pigeonholed as, the comedy guy or the biopic guy. And as everybody on this Zoom knows, we can do anything. You know, we especially we all love movies. We study movies, and if you understand drama, if you understand acting, you understand, cinematography and directing, you can really make anything, or at least try.
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. Today's episode takes us behind the scenes of director Shaka King's new biographical drama, Judas and the Black Messiah. The film tells the true story of William O'Neill, a career thief who is conscripted by the FBI to infiltrate the Illinois Black Panther Party and surveil their charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton. As Hampton's political influence grows, O'Neill is pushed to choose between his own freedom and bringing down a messiah. In addition to Judas and the Black Messiah, Mr. King's directorial credits include the feature film Newlyweds and episodes of the series Shrill, High Maintenance, and People of Earth. Mr. King spoke with DGA past president Taylor Hackford about filming Judas and the Black Messiah in front of a virtual audience. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Good evening, I'm Taylor Hackford, and I have the pleasure tonight to introduce Shaka King, the director and writer and producer of Judas and the Black Messiah. A very complex, very strong film, which, by the way, I love, and that's why I'm here. I want to express my passion. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I hope that all of you out there have seen it. If you haven't, you better see it, because I think it's crying out as a piece of art to us to look at a period of time in our history that we are all subject to the media and what the media says about us as a people and communities. And in this particular time, which is the time when I was in the Peace Corps and then came out of the Peace Corps, and this is, in the mid-60s, 68, 69, that area, the Black Panthers were painted in a particular way. And in this instance, Shaka has gone back and rewritten history, put a filter on it, and basically a magnifying glass, and telling us what we didn't hear. So let me start with asking you, Shaka, because this is a passion project, how this came about, why you decided to go this direction. I want to just say, I've checked your credits, and you've written comedy. You made a feature before this, which was a dramedy. So people would normally say, well, that's where he goes. What drew you to this?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words, and I'm glad you liked the movie, and thank you for doing this. The movie came to me from the Lucas brothers, comedian, comedy writing duo, and they, asked me if I was interested in making a movie that they called The Departed Inside the World of COINTELPRO, about Fred Hampton and William O'Neill. And when they laid the pitch out there like that, it just completely made sense to me. I could see the movie instantly, and I recognized, the cleverness of telling the story that way, because, I understood there was no way you were going to make a movie about Fred Hampton, or even the Black Panther Party. I think that was just a straight biopic. Put his politics aside, it was just the name recognition wasn't large enough for us to walk into, a meeting with a bunch of studio execs and say, hey, we want to make this movie about Fred Hampton. I would have said, who is that? And so I recognized that, especially, coming off the heels of Black Panther, and just, I remember going to see that movie in the theaters and audience members showing up in berets and leather jackets. And so there was a synergy there that was very obvious to me. And I knew that if we kind of couched it in genre, we could get it made. In terms of, what sort of made me think I could tell this story, the truth of the matter is, even though I'd been writing and directing comedy for several years, the movies I like to watch are crime dramas, specifically crime dramas of the 70s. That's like my comfort television, and so I study those films. I love those films. I always had a desire to, make something akin to those. But I recognize the impediments that existed just because, as you know, they typecast. If you're lucky enough to have success in the industry, you become pigeonholed as, the comedy guy or the biopic guy. And as everybody on this Zoom knows, we can do anything. You know, we all love movies. We study movies, and if you understand drama, if you understand acting, you understand, cinematography and directing, you can really make anything, or at least try. Um, and so I felt confident that I could pull it off.
I love the pitch, because the pitch is The Departed, and the whole concept of the person betraying the other. I mean, you don't need to go any further. You got that. And did you know about O'Neill? Did you know the
Not at
character?
all. Not at
See,
all. I knew
I
about Fred
didn't either.
Hampton.
I
Yeah.
didn't know. I knew Hampton, but I didn't know that. It's an incredible relationship that is innately dramatic.
Exactly. Exactly. The thing that was crazy was that once I started reading up about him, everything I read about him portrayed him as Fred Hampton's bodyguard, and Fred Hampton's driver. And so my understanding was that they had a lot closer relationship than they actually had. It wasn't until I met Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., Fred Hampton's son, that I found out that they had no relationship. They were not friends. He wasn't Fred's driver or bodyguard, and so we had to. I mean, at this point, my co-writer Will Burson and I had done probably 5 or 6 drafts, and we had to kind of go back to the drawing board and take a completely different approach, because, as you said, it's an inherently dramatic situation when you're talking about two people with a relationship. It becomes significantly less dramatic when you're talking about two people who Fred Hampton Jr. saying, you can't even photograph them alone in the same room. And so it became kind of a magic trick. Like, how do we make these two seem like a relationship is forming between the two of them without it being a movie about, a guy essentially betraying his best friend?
Yeah, I think that also is a fascinating thing. When you are doing something that's fictional, you're doing something that you're creating. You can create really any relationship you want. The problem when you deal with reality is that these are real people, and you can take a little bit of dramatic license sometimes. But like you said, there's Fred Hampton Jr. There's living. You can't go out there and say, "Oh, I'm to hell with it. I'm throwing out the window." Some people try that in films, and when they do, I really get upset, because I'm going,
Yeah.
"What do you have? I know you can make it dramatic, but the fact is you're being tied to that umbilical cord, which is reality. You better stay true to the facts." Now, within that, and you did. I think you made it a very compelling story. I think a fascinating thing in this film, you start with O'Neill, and you start with a guy. He's coming in. He's knocking over a bar. He impersonates an FBI guy, and you don't start with Hampton, which I think is, as you were saying, who is Fred Hampton? We discover him. You got a great act. I mean, Lakeith Stanfield, fantastic. I mean, he's wonderful. One would call him the star, although Daniel, is definitely the star also. And as a supporting player, there's an actor named Jesse Plemons, right?
hmm
Fantastic, the guy who plays the FBI guy. So the performances, that's the other thing. You've got a very visual picture, but you also know actors. You've acted yourself, haven't you?
One time, but I don't even consider that. It's me and my best friend and my cousin.
Got
But
it.
but
Well, the fact is, you got great performances, which is so
thank you.
important in a drama. But the point is that you go in, you discover this guy. You discover Judas first, and you see the situation he's in. And there's a fantastic thing that I think Lakeith did as an actor. He's without power. he's there. He's certainly got guts. He goes to knock this place off. But at the moment that Jesse Plemons grabs him and gets him and presents him, you impersonated a federal officer, you're going to jail for a long time. Or you can do this. And now we're led into, we meet. So I think that I'm complimenting you on this, on the structure, because we meet the Judas first, and now he brings us to the Black Messiah, and we discover. Let's talk about. I'm saying that you've got great roles here. Let's talk about casting, because as you know, we all have to cast the people that fit a role. Sometimes great actors just don't fit the role, and they say, but I'm really great. Yeah, you are, but you're wrong for this role. Yeah. So let's talk about those three actors, and then we'll talk about Dominique also. But let's talk about those three actors and how you found.
The truth of the matter is you should ultimately lump Dominique in, because the truth is I wrote it for the four of them.
Oh, you did?
From the time I was writing the screenplay, I saw Daniel, I saw Lakeith, I saw Jesse, and I saw Dominique. And I actually, before we went out to pitch to the studios, we had Daniel, Lakeith, and Dominique attached. Jesse came really late. I wanted him attached early, but we just had a difficult time tracking him down. And it wasn't until we were about 2 weeks out from shooting that I got a hold of him.
You're kidding. He came in that late.
Yeah, wow. He came really late.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, in a way, I was ready to give the casting director all this credit. You already. We didn't also mention, there's a member of this guild, and somebody I know. I met him when he was in film school. Ryan Coogler, who is an incredible director, but he, was one of the producers on this film, and I'm sure, as he's got his plate full, but he must have seen this and decided, I want to sign on. Tell us about that.
So he and I have been friends since Sundance 2013, where myself, Ryan, and his wife and producing partner Zinzi were snowed in Utah. And so we've stayed in touch over the years. And I think it was summer 2017. He was over at my house hanging out with me and my parents in our backyard. And he asked me what I was working on. And I told him about this movie, and I saw his eyes light up. And when he and Zinzi were leaving the house, they said, hey, if you ever want us to help with anything, you just want, even introducing you to folks, like, just let us know. And so as soon as I finished the script, I called him, asked him if he was interested in coming on board. He read it, he bought in, and then he ended up bringing on Charles King as the third producer, who also financed half of the film.
Well, that's huge, because everyone, not everyone, but I'm sure all the people watching who have worked with studios have worked with companies, corporations. This is not the kind of movie that you would ever think that Warner Brothers would make. I mean, I just don't. When Spike made Malcolm X, Spike had done a lot of films, and he basically at this point kind of deserved to get his shot to make a big film, and he did, and he knocked it out of the park. But he also had a proven movie star playing.
Right. And he also, from what I've heard, is he still had to raise outside money to finish that movie, to get Michael Jordan to give him money. Oprah Winfrey, I think, gave him some money to finish the picture. So he had a tough time too.
Yeah. Well, it's when somebody has a vision and doesn't fit into, quote, commercial vein, it is. But what I think in terms of Ryan, one, I know his reputation, he's got a huge amount of integrity, but also his success has got to help. But for him to bring along a guy who's going to put up half the dough, that really helps, because that also tells me that Warner Brothers went, hey, we this is a risk, but we're not taking the whole risk.
Exactly. No, Ryan was the glue, not just in terms of, getting a movie like this made. I mean, the movie literally stands on the shoulders of the success of Black Panther. He could have gotten anything made probably around after that film. But he also was the glue in terms of us getting the support of the family. Because, I insisted early on, I was like, once we had a draft that we felt comfortable sharing, I said, we've got to share it with Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., just from a principal perspective. And we did, and it was our first conversation was a 12-hour meeting in Chicago at Fred Hampton's childhood home. 12 hours. And it was passionate. We laughed. We got yelled at. I mean, as he would say, you guys started from a deficit because you wrote a screenplay without even talking to me. And I said, that's valid. But at the same time, you weren't going to talk to me if I didn't have something to show you,
Right.
But what helped smooth things over was the fact that he and Ryan had bumped into each other in the Bay when Ryan was a grad student, and they happened to remember one another. I mean, I think Chairman was handing out flyers at an event, and Ryan took one. And for whatever reason, they happened to remember one another. And I'm talking a seconds long encounter all these years later. And I think there was just a rapport, as you mentioned, Ryan being such a person of such unbelievable integrity. That's palpable. You feel it when you're in his presence. I think Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. felt that. And also the fact that Ryan's from the Bay, the Panthers started in the Bay. There was that Bay Area connection as well. And so, Ryan was the glue in a lot of ways.
I think the was Ryan also. I mean, you had all these actors in mind when you were writing the script. 4 main characters, amazing. Did you know them? How did you connect with them?
I was friends with Lakeith, who funnily enough, I met through Ryan in 2014 at the Spirit Awards. He introduced us, and we'd always talked about working together. Dominique Fishback and I, she joined UTA, which is where I'm repped. She joined UTA, I think, while I was in the midst of writing the script, and I got a random email saying, "Hey, do you want to meet with this actress?" I said, "Funnily enough, I'm writing something for her right now," and she lives in Brooklyn. So for about a year and a half before we started even prepping, she and I were just having conversations, and she was really played an integral role in developing that character. And then Jesse was the one that was really difficult to track down. We tried going through his reps, and the reps kept telling us, we've given him the script. He's not responding. I don't know what's happening. And then obviously the studio thought about pivoting. The producers thought about pivoting just because there was an opportunity to cast a really famous, look, that's our white actor. Like they were like, we can get anybody. Let's get Jake Gyllenhaal. Let's get Chris Pratt. But I always wanted Jesse, and that would have also brought the budget up, I think, significantly, getting some big movie star. And I just really was insistent upon Jesse. And when we didn't get those actors that they were seeking, I ended up, we were, like I said, 2 weeks out from shooting the movie, and I believe it was my production coordinator. Or no, it was somebody on the producing side of things who'd worked with Jesse on another picture and happened to have his phone number. And he said, "Don't tell him I did this," and he slipped it to me. And I called Jesse, went straight to voicemail. And so I sent him a long text saying, "Hey, I've been trying to track you down. I don't know if you've gotten the script, and here's the project." And he called me immediately, said, "I've never heard of this. I'm really sorry. I would have never just ignored you for a year. Let me read it. I'll read it tonight, and I'll get back to you tomorrow." And he read it. He liked it, and he talked to his wife to make sure it was okay for him to step away for a little while, and then he joined us.
I think that's this is a great lesson just to all filmmakers. We work in a system where you send a piece of material to an agent or a manager, and you trust that they're going to send it on. But of course, what they're thinking is this a bona fide offer? How much money is involved? And the words that come back many times, well, we just couldn't get a hold of him, or it's not for him, or what, and you don't really know whether
you don't know if they've ever seen it. Have they ever? You don't even know if they've read the thing.
No. And that's why it's crucial, and this is what I think is so fantastic about your vision. You had this in mind. You had an actor in mind. They were, I'm sure the studio was saying, we can give you better. We can give you big names. And this time you stayed with your vision. But, 2 weeks out, that's tough. So when you hear stories like that and they come true, but of course, it's a powerful thing to talk to an actor and say, you know what? I wrote this role with you in mind. I mean, what actor can say no to that?
Right. They'll at least read it,
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. Um, and the process of Chicago, which is a very unique place. I mean, are you originally from New York? I know that's where you
From
live
yeah,
now.
but yeah, I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised.
You are. So, and I'm from the West Coast, but you got, the stink of Chicago in this movie, in the bones. It's there. It's important to have because Chicago is a unique place. And that was, Fred Hampton's stomping grounds. That's where he was. And I loved your use of that city. Um,
Well, I should tell you no. I should let you know we shot in Cleveland.
well, you know
But
what?
we did. I mean, it was for the tax credit. We scouted West Side of Chicago. We wanted to shoot in the West Side of Chicago desperately. It broke my heart not to shoot on the West Side of Chicago because it has a very specific look. And the West Side of Chicago is in some ways trapped in a time warp, even though, there's been a lot more development than there has in Cleveland. The great thing about Cleveland is it is truly trapped in a time warp.
Yeah.
And I mean, most of the movie's interiors, just because we didn't have $60 million and $90 million to have those, massive wide exteriors that really sell the time period. So you had to be really purposeful with that. But we found such great interiors that it didn't diminish the scope of the movie, and we could have only gotten those interiors in Cleveland.
Yeah, I got to tell. I mean, Chicago is a very specific town. But what I'm saying is, and the Midwest and in the industrial Midwest is a very specific look. It ain't New York and it ain't California. So the fact
Yeah.
that you have Cleveland, you fooled me, but no, I didn't see the loop and I didn't see the lake and those kinds of things that you would in Chicago. But the neighborhoods and the situations you shot I thought were believable. And they were believable because, like I said, the industrial Midwest and its rot, and
Yes. Yes.
its toughness,
Yes.
um, and its soulfulness, I think was there. And I'm going to compliment you because I saw that grit on the film, which was
Thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you.
Um, let's talk about. We've talked about script and we've talked about the actors, and we'll talk more about them. But you collaborated with a fantastic cinematographer. Sean Bobbitt I love his work. He is into he really goes for dark, high contrast. He loves shadows. I think the thing that was interesting to me about this film is that you got it's a portrait in black, and I know because I've made films with a lot of black actors, right?
Mhm.
And black isn't black. Black goes from blue black, which is
Mhm.
into a creamy,
Daniel,
yeah.
exactly.
And a cinematographer can drive them crazy because they're trying to get it, and you got to say, hey, this is what black people are. There's this incredible process of shades. You got to do it. You got to capture it. And I love this picture because you got these dark shadows and people coming out of those dark shadows. I mean, talk to me about your process with Sean and what you wanted. And
It's so funny you say that because, you know, our makeup artist, Sean Richards, I mean, she made Halle Berry a old German woman in a movie, right? So she's really skilled at prosthetics, and she really has a desire to, if she's doing a movie about a historical figure, make a person look like the person they're playing. And Daniel, as you know, is a very dark skinned man. And Fred Hampton was dark skinned, but he wasn't nearly as dark as Daniel. And she came to me and she said, I want to lighten Daniel's skin. And she was really pushy about it too. And I said, "You're out of your mind. First of all, I'm not taking 6 hours in the morning to put this man in the makeup chair every day. Second of all, his skin is iridescent. It's one of the it's he has a lot of gifts as an actor. He's one of the best actors in the world. But the way that his skin reflects light, and Sean Bobbitt and I talked about this, just like because he shot Daniel, in Widows, and we just love how his skin takes to light. And so we wanted to really, like you said, the beauty of those different shades of brown, you know, against these pastel backdrops that we found in Cleveland. A color that we would refer to as panther green, this kind of mint green that would show up at these different locations. And Sam Lysenko, our production designer, he just did a masterful job of, finding these locations that kind of acted as a canvas. And against the canvas, you had these brown tones of skin, and our costume designer just adding color, earth tones, and just dots of color to create this almost kaleidoscopic, just image. And it all really starts, to kind of get back to your original question, with I have a friend named Akeem McKenzie who's a production designer, and he was attached to this film before he had to leave and go do Space Jam. Before he left, he gave me about 300 photos of the West Side of Chicago from 1967 to 73. And the Kodachrome look in those photos was just it. We had the look of the movie. And when I met with Sean and I presented him this, he was like, well, this is what we're going for. Like, we have what we need. And so it was really just replicating that tonality.
Yeah, it reminded me, I started shooting, Super 8 way back when with Kodachrome, and at the time you go, but it's got that really strong contrasty and saturated quotient. Eastman came in that was more pastel-y, all that. But I love Kodachrome because it's just a hard edge to it, and it fit this film beautifully. And did he shoot digital on this?
Yeah, he shot with an Alexa.
But he made it look, and it's what a cinematographer does. They play with light and they make it work. But I love the look. I think it fit the story.
Agreed.
That's the other thing. Sometimes you see a cinematographer who has a vision, but it doesn't fit the story. Those are pretty pictures, but but we're telling a different story here. You need that mating of style with story, and I think that that your film does that beautifully. One thing that I think, let's talk about the relationships here and what you were going for. Dominique is such a strong actress and such a real actress. I mean, she just reeks of integrity when she comes on. And with she and Daniel, there's looks. There's dialogue. Not a lot of dialogue from him. He has huge amounts of dialogue, as a political person would. He's speaking to the crowds. But with her, he's just looking at her. She does more talking. Am I right? Than he does. Yes. And there's incredible chemistry there, And of course, the great compliment, she says, "You're a poet." It doesn't get any better than that. But is that true to the real relationship that they had?
No, it's funny because Akua Najeri, formerly known as Deborah Johnson, so Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. was on set every day. Akua would visit from time to time and weigh in with, she had very strong opinions. And one of the things she was really passionate about, we tried to accommodate their needs as much as possible, but there were certain things we couldn't accommodate. And one was this. She said, look, Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. was the leader of our organization. This was a very disciplined organization. I would never have spoken to him this way. I would have never sassed him and spoken back to him that way because, she calls her son Comrade. He calls his mother Comrade, and she called Chairman Fred Hampton Chairman. That's how she referred to him. And so what I expressed to her was, look, I understand that, but we're operating from a deficit in the sense that this is not when you look at the history of women in the Panthers, even though it's well documented that there was, a lot of misogyny, in the national organization. Interestingly enough, in Illinois, that was not the case. If you look at the history, there were times where the Illinois chapter was mostly women, and there were women in positions of leadership. And so the fact that we didn't have a strong female presence in the film bothered me a lot. And so I didn't think it was right for one of the few strong women that we have in the movie for us to make her subservient to this man. I was like, she has to be his peer, and that's what he has to see in her that attracts him to her. Everyone else has to treat him like a superhuman being except her. She has to treat him like just, you're a man and I'm a woman. And, I fought for that. And we got to do
Did
it. And I
she?
think
Did she? I know you're listening
she
to the
eventually
director.
did. She eventually accepted it. She eventually did. But it was, I mean, even in post, she fought us on it,
Well,
you know.
let's talk about this because as a filmmaker, you've got a vision. The crew and the cast are looking to you, but to have, I know I've made biographies before, and to have the family there and have the family with a strong point of view can be incredibly intimidating, not and inhibiting and destructive. Pardon me.
Yeah.
So in this instance, how did you handle that? I mean, it's great that you involved him early in the script, so he already knew. Fred Hampton knew that you were going to you'd made changes as per his comments. That's a big step. But was there times when things stopped?
It was a challenge for us throughout the shoot. Post not so much, but he read a bunch of drafts before signing on. And it took about a year and change of us building a relationship before he agreed to come on set. In fact, he turned us down right before we started shooting. And we shot the first week, and Ryan flew back to Chicago without telling me and brought the dailies so he could see the dailies. And he was loving everything. And then one scene came on, and he was so upset with something we'd done that he said, it was perfect. He said, okay, if you guys are doing this, I got to be there to make sure shit like this doesn't happen. So I'll come on board. And he flew to Cleveland, and he was there for the duration. And every day the changes that he'd want to make would range from things that, were seemingly innocuous to changes he wanted to make that were like tectonic shifts to the production. And I would try to, we had a protocol. I was busy working with the crew and the actors. We had 3 assistants who would be by Video Village talking to him, and the producers as well. And either the assistants or the producers would basically act as go-betweens between the two of us and say, well, Jim and Fred would like you to take this in consideration and this. And I'd say, okay, let me think. Let me see if I can kind of, pull off a sideways move here. And it was good training for just like dealing with the studio once the movie was finished, in terms of how do you accommodate your collaborators' desires and needs and still satisfy your own. And in a lot of ways, it was no different than working with the studio with the producers when we had a disagreement. The difference being they have an understanding of how movies work, and he was learning how movies work on the fly. And so there were things he'd sometimes ask us to change that he wouldn't understand, that, well, we already shot that this way and we can't go back and alter that. But there were other things. There were things that we shot that we had to change in post, and were expensive. But he was adamant that we go this route. And ultimately, in those instances, I'm glad we did, because he was right.
Yeah. Listen, in all film, the last rewrite takes place in the editing room.
Mm-hmm.
You can work on the script, you go out, you shoot it, you do all the things that are there, and then you get in and you start composing the actual finished product, and you feel that, as much as I did this and it was my personal vision, these things didn't work or did work, and we've got to make adjustments. And that finesse, I think that most people never know, that audiences never know the finesse that you can do in the editing room to make things work. And at the same time, you don't want them to be jarred. Oh, gee, there's something happening. No, it's got to be smooth, and
Right.
you got to be able to do it. But you can make real changes, and that's one of the joys of filmmaking. Every part of the process, every step, is nuanced and has huge hurdles. But you can always kind of deal with it and make those adjustments that make the film better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is. I want to let's talk. One of the things about this film that I think was a choice, definitely. Because as I mentioned, I graduated from college in '67. I went in the Peace Corps in '68, '69 in South America. So this period of time was the flowering of Black Power. It was a very intense time, and there was a style of speech that was very specific, and you did it here. And I, the fact is, it's one of those things where you start watching the movie if you're not familiar, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people, whether they're black or white, that go, what, and at the same time, it's one of those things where if you work at it, if you're in it, then pretty soon it becomes clear. But you didn't clean it, smooth it, make everything, kind of in a middle ground. I think that their dialogue was unbelievably authentic, and that was a choice, right?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even a thought. I started out as a screenwriter. The first thing I got into filmmaking from writing short stories, and I've always felt very comfortable writing dialogue. I've always felt good, like I was good at it, good at hiding exposition at it, and good at capturing how people really talk. And even I'm 40 years old, but I've been a fan of old, movies and music, specifically music from that era my whole life, and consumed it since I was a teenager. And so I it wasn't something it wasn't like I had to think. I knew the era I was writing, and I read so many books when I was a kid, and that were written by like Richard Wright and James Baldwin and Ralph Ellison and Iceberg Slim, and so I just understand that speech, and I have a secondhand, and it's just I just know it, and so I just felt very comfortable writing that stuff.
How was it? You've got Daniel, who's basically an Englishman. I mean, his family's from Africa, but he's an Englishman, and he's coming into. It's not like he's doing that straight mid-Atlantic accent or trying to. I mean, he's doing that. We're talking about this very specific dialogue. How was that for him? I mean, was he? Obviously it was brilliant because he did a brilliant job, but it couldn't have been easy.
So about a year before we started rolling, he and I got together for about 4 to 5 days, and we just talked about the dialect and played around with different things and talked about different influences I shared with him. And I mean, the influences ranged from Bernie Mac, who's a comedian from Chicago, to Robin Harris, who was another comedian from Chicago, to Eddie Murphy. And there's a voice that Eddie Murphy used to do, that we kind of borrowed from. Obviously, Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., who sounds almost like exactly like his father. And so we had this sort of amalgam and obviously Chairman Fred Hampton himself. So we had this, some references there. But ultimately, it really came down to Daniel doing the work. One thing, it's funny to be talking to you because one thing we discussed was, well, let's look at Jamie Foxx's performance in Ray, right? Where he sounds and looks exactly like this man. I mean, you close your eyes and you think you're listening to Ray Charles speak and sing, right? But if Daniel tried to do that with Fred Hampton, the dialect, especially the way that Fred Hampton spoke, was an incredibly fast speaker. He had that kind of Louisiana drawl because his folks were from Louisiana, combined with the Midwestern thing. And then I'm convinced that he had a deviated septum. And so there's a sort of O sound to his tonality. And combine all those things, you're looking at potentially having to subtitle some of this stuff. And we wanted to avoid that. And so it was like, how do we, instead of trying to go Jamie Foxx and Ray, let's look at Denzel and Malcolm X, where it's an interpretation. It's not exactly like Malcolm X, but there's something to it where you hear it and you say, that sounds like Malcolm X, even though it doesn't sound exactly like Malcolm X. And so we decided, during those 4 days that we were going to go in that direction. And then it came down to, Daniel and his dialect coach, Audrey LaCrone, who was incredible, really just working that material. Daniel took opera lessons because he knew that he was going to have to do some of these really big speeches, and he wanted to blow out his voice. So he wanted to learn how to, essentially sing the words from his diaphragm.
From his diaphragm, that's amazing.
Yeah. And it just, it's much of the work all of the work was done by him.
Let's talk about that. And in the latter part of the film, he comes and he has this huge speech, which is amazing performance. And I am a revolutionary. That whole process, but that's a riff that they use in in the
The
promotion of the
trailer.
film and so forth.
Yeah.
But the words of that speech, which are truly radical,
Hmm. Hmm.
are those the actual words of Fred Hampton in that speech?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you get a sense. This is the thing I wanted to talk about here too. You know, when you have that speech, you realize that Fred Hampton is out there preaching revolution,
Hmm.
and he's out there some pretty strong radical points of view.
Hmm.
I know he quotes Mao in the piece,
Hmm.
but the
Hmm.
fact is that people forget at that time, and I also think I'm going to tie this into the fear that happened. Because
Hmm.
a major character, although and he appears, Martin Sheen appears as J.
Hmm.
Edgar Hoover. People, the ghost of J. Edgar Hoover hangs on over all of our heads
Yeah.
because this is a man who got into power, knew how to blackmail the presidents, was able to stay there forever. He was
Hmm.
he was from the South. He was clearly a racist. He
Hmm.
was gay, but
Hmm.
hid that. I mean,
Hmm.
all of these things. This complicated, really difficult man, but clearly he was racist, and
Hmm.
clearly he saw in that speech that this was a revolutionary that he had to get rid of. I mean, you use that, and of
Hmm.
course the sense is, and I think it's been proven since, that the FBI just got, we got to get rid of this guy, and they did,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you've made it very clear. But I think that you also, and I think this is one of the things I want to talk to people about in this movie. There's a fantastic sense of human beings in this piece. Let's take the two people who were mostly responsible for the destruction of this heroic figure. And that is, O'Neill, played by Lakeith, and the FBI agent, played by Jesse Plemons.
Hmm.
And it would be really easy just to say they were snide, you know, but they're both painted in their own way as being powerless. Now, Jesse, as an FBI agent, is definitely, he's playing. He's playing and punking out, O'Neill. Um, but at the same time, that what he does, and I think this is a brilliant thing about a film that takes place, 40 years ago, and at the same time has total relevance today. There's that sequence in there where you meet this FBI agent who tells you he went to Mississippi and he was dealing with some really bad cats, and they were white, and there was the Ku Klux Klan, and he put them in jail, he brought them to justice. You think, God, this guy's okay. And at the same time, then he turns it, and what he's saying is, this guy Hampton and the Panthers are bad people. They're the same thing as the Klan, and you hear it, and what I immediately drew conclusions to was today. These Black Lives Matter people are out rioting in the streets, and these white supremacists over here, they're both bad. Or there's, as our former
Bad
president said,
people on both sides. Yeah.
oh no, he said they're good people on both
That's
sides.
right. Good people on both sides.
you
Right.
know, but
Even worse.
yeah, but here we are looking at something that happened, quote, historically, and you get the fear, and you can hear J. Edgar Hoover justifying in his own mind, I got to get rid of this guy because there could be a revolution here. He had his own feelings about Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King was powerful and
Well,
had.
I think the thing that J. Edgar Hoover probably feared most was the fact that the Panthers were feeding kids, and that was successful because I think he recognized if they're gonna get support of people, and when they get the support of the people are gonna start questioning. Well, hey, how come the government's not feeding my kids, and how come they're taking money out of my check and they're not really doing it for me?
Right.
And so I think that's what ultimately made the Panthers the greatest threat was that they were essentially brilliantly looking to replace the government
Yeah,
because the government wasn't doing what they said they were going to, what they were supposed to be doing.
I told you earlier, I was a reporter for public television. I interviewed Huey Newton, just him and me on the whole show. Fascinating because he and Bobby Seale, created that party. And they're very strong, very smart guys.
Mm-hmm.
But as the government thought, very dangerous people, for that same reason. And I think that what you've done with this document of a historic situation is at the same time for those people who really want to it's not so hard to look at our situation today and realize that there's real relevance here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel.
Yeah, I agree. And it wasn't so much something I set out to do intentionally. I did notice overlap. Like there's certain scenes. I remember when we were writing the scene where the Panthers go and visit the young Patriots, and it's revealed that their symbol is the Confederate flag. I said, this is something that's interesting to just put forth today, because so much has been made of that flag, and you hear poor white Southerners, not even poor white Southerners, just like white Southerners saying, well, I'm not racist. That just represents, my culture. And so the fact that that same ideology existed then, and those individuals in the Young Patriots, it's funny. I did an interview earlier today where the reporter described them as white supremacists. And I said, they weren't white supremacists. And he said, well, they come off that way in the meeting. I said, no, they don't.
No, they don't.
I said, no, they don't. Not at all.
No.
But the iconography is so strong.
Well, I think that the iconography is, and that's the thing, for Black people, that flag, represents
means a very different thing.
But guess what? Fred Hampton walked into that meeting, and there it is on the wall. And I think that was one of the strongest scenes. Here's a guy who should have said, but he didn't.
That's his power. That's one of his gifts.
Yeah,
finding points of interest.
And he succeeded. See, that's the thing. He succeeded in that Rainbow Coalition. It's fascinating film. You made a feature before this, a little feature. What was the budget?
$300,000.
So you graduated, and this is a much larger canvas. Tell me about what this whole experience, both experiences, because the first film, believe me, everybody that's watching this film has made a first film, and whatever it was, beg, borrow, or steal, we got it on the screen, and it's a big deal. And now you've done this. What are those two processes aiming towards? That you've done it, and I know you're still in the middle, and I hope, really sincerely hope that it's recognized. By the way, you've done it, it's on the screen, and I think the respect is going to come from the people who watch it. Awards are awards, and we all know that that's a nice thing, but it's also, because there's also great films that never get any awards. Right. We all know those. But right now, what is this process taking you to, and where is it going to lead you to?
I just want to make whatever I want to make cinematically. That's it. I love comedy. I still love comedy. I love crime movies. I have interest. There's something I want to do that I'm kind of an idea that I've been tinkering with the last few weeks before, this press run started. That's the best way I can describe it is tonally. It's kind of like my favorite kind of cinema right now, which is Korean cinema, which is toneless.
Agreed.
There's the tone is whatever the director wants to do in the moment, and I love how brave that filmmaking is, and I want to try that.
I totally agree with you. There's a boldness, there's a fearlessness to try things. You would if you said this is what it's going to be, you go, what?
Exactly.
And then you watch it and you go, that works. Or I'm touched, or it's really powerful.
Or all in the same movie.
Yeah. It's bold. It's bold. Well, listen, I really appreciate the time. I hope that we have a big audience watching from the DGA. This film really deserves to be seen. Please watch it, and you make your own opinions. But make sure before you vote, you've seen at least this film too. I'm urging my brethren out there. I love this guild, and I think that this is a different audience. I've tried to make this about a filmmaker, and I think you've been incredibly articulate, and your journey, in which many of us have taken, is very specific, and I just congratulate you for getting this on the screen. I know it wasn't easy.
Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate it a lot. Thanks for doing this. I really really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more, The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay tuned in the coming weeks as we bring you discussions of films from Rada Blank, Tara Mealy, and Gerard Bush and Christopher Renz. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.